Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfurth, and Redbridge's Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. Welcome back, Curtinistas. Welcome back to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast of culture, politics and ideas. I'm Nick Dyrenfurth, and it's fantastic to welcome back my great mate, Kung Fu Samaras. Cozzy, I've missed you. Yeah. Listeners, I've missed you.
Welcome back, mate. Welcome back.
Feels like a long time. It's been a long time.
Well, it's been over a month.
Yeah. I really haven't known what to do with myself on a Monday. Hopefully there's a few listeners who feel the same way. And there has been a lot going on, an absolute plethora. I've been itching to get back into the studio, Cozzy. We've talked a lot about political realignment and de-alignment, and it has been happening in real time as we've been off air. We've seen the coalition imploding, divorcing, getting back together, potential leadership challenges coming and going, maybe back on again this week with Angus Taylor. One Nation surging. So what is the what is the polling telling us? Cos you got into the field, Redbridge, quite late in the day.
Yeah, we waited until the end of January to make sure that whoever was away on holidays was going to be captured by our survey. And it did not take us by surprise that we recorded the first really big shift of support for One Nation. And, of course, Newspoll has a week later followed up with the very similar results. What it shows us is obviously a very significant level of growth for One Nation, completely at the cost of the coalition. And Labor's primary vote hasn't really changed all that much since the federal election, which confirms some of the points we've been making over the last 6 months, which is, we're living in a very tribal political environment now. And we rarely see people who usually sit on the sort of centre-right, centre-left block move over or jump over the river and start voting for centre-right or right-wing parties. It just doesn't happen like it used to 20 years ago, especially amongst younger voters, even diverse voters. So that's the numbers now. So we're seeing One Nation well into the mid-20s. The coalition's
clearly the biggest so-called opposition party.
Yes, biggest. And the coalition is, we had them at 19. Newspoll's got them at 18. That's really data noise. They're in the high teens, full stop. Liberal Party, once we remove the LNP, and the National Party is in the low teens. And they're in a really serious predicament because you've got a situation now where they are getting cannibalised from the right after they've already been cannibalised from the left via the Teal independents in 2022 and the Labor Party to a certain extent in 2025. So what's left of the Liberal Party vote? There will be an element that is still moderate and there'll be an element that's still very conservative and right-wing. The question is, will that moderate component, when faced with the prospect of a growing One Nation alternative, jump to Labor or other independents? That's a real life prospect. So we probably have not seen the bottom of their vote yet.
And it seems to me it's unique, isn't it? Because Labor's experienced similar problems being buffeted by forces to its left and its right. Left with the Greens, but to the right, it was part of its base, whether it was John Howard or Scott Morrison or Tony Abbott, briefly, being attracted to centre-right politics. this is different. Like you've got seems to be structurally,
It's
culturally
that's
different.
right.
You've got the Teals,
Yep.
who are arguably to the left of the Liberals and the coalition, and then you've got One Nation. It's One Nation, which is just that's qualitatively and quantitatively different to what Labor experienced. So I just want to ask you a question, guys. If we were to see these figures with the Liberal Party primary of 15% plus the Nats on 3%, what would that look like at a general election?
General election? Fairly dire, because I would still expect the Liberal Party to lose ground in what's left of their urban footprint. So a federal seat like Mitchell in Sydney, I think that will fall at the next election if the current numbers hold and if they pursue an anti-immigration narrative. Because again, I'll make this point that when you ask Australians, is immigration too high? Yeah, everyone's going to say yes. But then when you speak to those who sit on the left side of politics or are centre left orientated, they're not voting on it, but also they have a view that when Conservatives talk about it, it's not really about a concern about immigration or housing or anything like that. It's really about dislike for them.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a problem for them. Where I think the One Nation's really going to cause them the coalition a lot of problems is in country, regional Australia, particularly national party seats. So if they're polling 25, 26, 27%, they're in the mid-30s and 40s somewhere, and somewhere in a lot of places like Queensland and regional New South Wales. And I wouldn't rule out Victoria either. So any seat the National Party holds, that's probably going to be in the gun. I'll be surprised if Barnaby Joyce just doesn't stand in New England, because he'll definitely win. Based on these numbers, his primary is probably sitting in the 40s. So that's where the pain's going to be felt. And now, okay, so why are conservative working class people in this country bailing on the established political order, that being the Liberal Party and the National Party? Well, if you look at the statistics, the standard of living for regional Australians has been on the decline now for at least 2 decades. Couple that with the global economy has contracted to the big cities. This is a thing that we're seeing right across the Western world, right? So if you're if you're in the UK, for example, if you don't live in London, you're older, you used to work with your hands, or you have been working with your hands, life's getting pretty tough, right? Opportunities are less, you're earning less. In Australia, we've just done a recent survey that actually I was on a panel with Professor Brendan Murphy last week about the out-of-pocket expenses that Australians are experiencing when having to go for surgery. Okay, so 1 in 3 Australians are avoiding surgery because of fear of bill shock. But then when we go to regional Australia, that's 50%. But then when we look at Gen X, it's 60 to 75%. So again, when the Conservatives say to these regional Australians, "Oh, look, vote for us because we'll go into bat for the economy for you." Yes, but 20 years of experience tells them otherwise.
The Gen X, that's the big number, isn't it?
Yes. Male and female.
That was one of the big numbers that came out of your poll in December. You had, I think it was 1 in 4 Gen X men had made the switch to One Nation.
Now it's just 1 in 4.
Now it's 1 in 4 across genders.
Yep. That's right. These individuals, they're Howard's battlers. They used to vote Conservative, being Liberal or National Party, because they thought that particular party or parties was in the business of managing the economy that was designed to reward their hard work. Well, they have not actually experienced that for quite some time. And the point I would like to make is that what I think the Conservatives and some in the media forget is that it wasn't a long time ago before there was a coalition government in power, right? So they were there for 9 years, and during that 9-year period, these Australians that we're talking about, their living standards went backwards. It didn't improve. So it's pretty hard for them to then turn around and say, look, vote for us again, because if you do, then we will deliver for you. Well, there's no proof in that.
No, well, let's look at the last 3 decades, the coalition have been in power for 21 out of the last 30 years.
Yes, and if you're a Gen Xer and you live in the regions and you've been voting Conservative, you've only got one experience from that, and that is your life's gone backwards.
So the question, Cos, then is, what does the coalition do? Now, they've got the coalition. You kept referring to them as the former coalition.
They're back together.
I'm delighted in that commentary over the past week. Technically back together as of yesterday. I can't see. It looks like Susan Lay's leadership is probably terminal. I don't see how David Littleproud survives either. I'm not sure about you, but I think David Littleproud is by a considerable margin the worst leader of the Nationals Party that I've ever seen.
Look, the problem they have is they're looking for old world solutions for new world problems. So they think that by swapping leaders, they're gonna fix what is really an existential crisis. It's akin to basically those who do follow international politics and have a distant memory of PASOK in Greece.
Yeah.
Right? PASOK was a centre-left social democratic movement that dominated the left side of politics in Greece for many decades. They then embraced austerity, and the rest is history. They were completely annihilated in an election and were replaced by a more radical left-wing political party in the name of Syriza. So we've seen these sort of movements happen in the past, and it didn't matter who the leader was, and it won't matter who the leader is now, because you can change the leader. That's not the reason people are jumping. Now, we've done a lot of analysis to work out why they're jumping. So hence I, at the beginning of our conversation, focused on the economy, right? Because that is really one of the real driver. It's the real undercurrent. But then they'll tell us they're sick of the two-party system. They sick of the infighting. And immigration's there. It's a motivating factor because they're conservative voters, right? So hence, I think you and I were discussing last year that this immigration debate was only going to hurt one side, right? And it was going to hurt the Conservatives, and it did.
Yeah, they created a Frankenstein.
Absolutely, right? And
it was obvious then. It was obvious then. You warned about it.
Correct. And they'll still go down this road because they think that's the only way they can put a moat around their primary vote to prevent it from continuing to decline towards One Nation. That won't help them.
No, because as Labor has learnt this lesson as well, you can't out-green the Greens.
No, and you can't out-Hanson Hanson.
You can't out-Hanson Hanson because people will just vote for the real thing.
That's right. That's right. So that's fundamentally the problem. So they can change a leader. They've been running a narrative against Susan Lee now since she was appointed as leader. I think she's been given one of the most difficult jobs in the country after a seismic election result where their primary was the lowest since 1943. They decided to start white-anting her, failing to understand that they were actually also undermining their political movement.
Have we seen the peak of One Nation?
We don't know.
Or is there scope for further growth?
We don't know, right? And so there is this open question that needs to be answered, and that is what happens, as I touched on before, what happens to the moderates that are still left on their pile, and what happens to the Conservatives that are still left on their pile. So, for example, the South Australian election, which is next month, and the polls are pretty clear, Malinowskis is going to win. It's going to win in a very significant way. The danger for the Liberal Party there is that the moderates jump to Labor, which I think they already have. I think what's left on the Liberal pile now in South Australia is the hard right. Well, what we know through our extensive research is that when faced with the prospect of a complete annihilation and a political party that they used to support that is coming across as incompetent and non-viable, they may jump to One Nation. We may see a situation where the Liberal Party is completely crushed in South Australia. In a state where I would say One Nation is not the strongest. If we're going to pick states which One Nation should perform really well, it's Queensland, it's New South Wales, and to a lesser extent Victoria.
Let's talk about some of the other push factors driving this surge in One Nation, the implosion of the coalition. You like to talk about the legacy media having created a right-wing populist Frankenstein. And the nice way of sort of explaining that is, that monster wasn't created in a lab like the literal Frankenstein, but it was created click by click by click, and it has blown up in the face of centre-right media, which may have thought it was doing centre-right politics a favour, but has created that Frankenstein.
Yes, because they still operated in the world which probably existed 20 years ago, where baby boomers dominated the electoral roll. There was a large portion of baby boomers that would switch their vote from Labor to Liberal on cultural issues and particularly issues of immigration and national security. Because switching your vote when you're a baby boomer in your 40s and 50s during a time of significant economic prosperity, the cost of switching your vote was minimal. And also you were living in a time when, well, the world was analog. It wasn't digital, wasn't online. We weren't pushed into tribes via our algorithmic ecosystems. But this world doesn't exist anymore, right? And we are now absolutely, ushered into particular ecosystems that, for example, I will only see certain things on my feed. Even though I'm a commentator, I will still only see certain things. I won't see the right-wing ecosystem.
You see a cage fight,
Of course, I always see cage fights and Thai kickboxing, Nick, Thai kickboxing, better than UFC. So that's the world we're now living in. Of course, the media, parts of the media, operated as if they could still persuade the vote to move from left to right on these cultural issues. What actually has happened is they've created a world which has amplified issues that really agitate right-wing voters. And of course, if you're going to vote on immigration, you vote for the real thing.
And they're cannibalising each other now. I mean, Paul Kelly has been out there. Paul Kelly is like a small C conservative, mainstream centre-right.
Significant
He's
intellectual.
been warning against trying to ape One Nation. In the last week, he was being bitterly attacked by the likes of Andrew Bolt, Peter Credlin, who don't seem to understand that they're feeding this beast.
I think they do. To be fair to them,
Well, they don't care. They're monetising it.
Yeah, but look, I think they do. I think they do care, and they are probably frustrated in seeing the world that they thought they were part of fragment. I think it's very hard for people of all levels of ability to wrap their heads around a world as it's collapsing. You and I are students of history, Nick, and we could go back into history and read the responses from very capable, intelligent people, and those responses, as those of us now looking back into history, look irrational and crazy, but to those individuals, that's all they could do. Right. And I think we just need to be open and frank about that. What is occurring on the conservative side of politics is unprecedented. And I don't think any of them have any idea where this is going. I don't think any of us do.
No, it is unprecedented.
Yeah.
I mean, the poll numbers, that they are the lowest that the Liberal Party has ever
absolutely
experienced.
Yeah.
And there is no, even when Labor collapsed during the Gillard government, its primary got down to, I think, 26, 27, 28%, and people thought that was the end of the world. This is worse.
Yes, it is.
This is much worse.
Yeah, that's right. I think back then, Labor primary was probably low 30s, maybe. Maybe there was a 2 in front of it, but it was never this bad.
It did. There was at least one poll where it
slipped.
slipped to 27, 28%.
Yeah.
And I think that was, and Gillard was moved on fairly shortly after
the
that.
The difference between then and now is, yes, it was down to whatever that number was, but it wasn't sitting on an alternative left-wing party that was gobbling it up.
Yeah.
And eating up its entire base, right? It was sitting in all sorts of places. And that's very different to now.
The other two big differences too there are, Labor, for all its foibles, still sits on relatively thick institutions, the organised labour movement, and the other thing which we haven't covered is preferences. We know that the Greens vote might, and we're going to turn to the Greens in a minute. They can't avoid the big stick either this morning, Cozzy. But Greens' preferences flow back to Labor in a highly disciplined manner. That's one of the other key differences that we're seeing at the moment is that One Nation preferences splay.
Yeah, look, a couple of things there. So, Labor has worked out that the world they now occupy in government is one that is driven by block voting.
Yeah.
So we don't see, as we touched on before, massive numbers of Australians move from left to right and vice versa. What we do see is a lot of fragmentation of the major party vote into their flanks. And the discipline of that spray we see writ large with the Green preferences that you touched on. We even saw that there was a by-election in Victoria last year, out there in Melbourne's western suburbs, the state seat of Werribee, where Labor lost 16% of its vote, and it all came back to it.
Yeah.
Right? And so I would expect some of that to now improve for the coalition. So we go to One Nation preference flows at the last election. It was higher than normal.
Yeah.
And so that's going to improve for them. They'll get preferences from One Nation at a much greater level, but still the spraying is going to be still costly in tight contests where there is a Labor versus Liberal contest in urban settings. That's where the One Nation vote is going to really kill the Liberal Party in seats. And then, of course, those preferences won't mean nothing when One Nation is beating them on primary vote and they're running third, right? And this is where they're going to be in trouble. And we'll see that probably, as I touched on, South Australia, but I think the real preview to all of this will be the Victorian state election.
Just hold your thought there, Kung Fu Cozzy. Hold your thought. Just one other sort of further clarifying thought on the blocks.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that the left block, if we want to call it that, I don't want to call it the progressive block, but the left block.
It's a left block, yeah.
Has at the moment is a larger block.
Oh, yeah.
In relative terms.
Yeah, in relative terms because of the age skew. So
yes,
because we now have a lot more millennial and Gen Z on the electoral roll and a lot more diverse people on the electoral roll, they tend to be more inclined to express a values framework that aligns with economic populism. We do in our polling a lot of what we call psychological battery tests, where I'll ask you 10 questions.
Sounds a bit scary.
Well, that's right. But I'll ask you 10 questions. You won't know the questions, why I'm asking those questions, and you'll give those answers, and you'll think they're fairly innocuous questions. But what we harvest from that is a values framework from you that is actually quite deeply psychologically entrenched in your makeup. And we can now map out the entire electorate based on who's economic populists, which electorates are more inclined to be economic populists versus which ones are more right-wing populists. Right? We've also learned doing that just how tribal and fixed the Australian electorate is now. So this notion that we're going back to the point we've made repeatedly during this podcast, that there is this vast armada of people that are willing to jump over from left to right and so on, that's gone. That wall's finished. Now, doesn't mean you don't see some votes go from Liberal to Labor and vice versa. That's still occurring, but nowhere near the size it used to 20 years ago.
Yes, but so this leads us nicely onto the Greens. Within that left block and that process of de-alignment from the majors, we're not seeing that in the left block at the moment. On face value, this moment should suit the Greens with frustration and anger at the so-called legacy institutional parties, but the Greens seem to be. It's not like their primary votes collapsed, but
they're not capitalising.
We're not seeing a sort of. We're not seeing a mirror image of what's happening on the right with One Nation. Why is that?
Yeah, so they're not capitalising on what it does exist, and that is a portion of the Labor base votes for Labor because there's nothing else. Because they are inclined to vote for a party that is more aligned with that sort of economic populist outlook of life. but the Greens is for them is not the alternative. So my point here is Labor in this country is fortunate because there isn't that other, I would say, centre-left option available to them, right? We saw that when we spoke about this last year in the Welsh by-election, right, where the Welsh National Party, which is actually a social democratic political movement, was able to capitalise on that, and so those former Labor voters went to that party rather than to Reform. These voters, generally speaking, still support Labor because they think that is the only political movement present today that really, in the end, is focused on taking care of the issues they care about, which is a level of equality they expect, whether it's their wages, tax, living standards, health, and so on, although they are still increasingly becoming unhappy.
Yes, and unhappiness, but not flowing through to the Greens. I saw Max Chandler-Mather popped up this week.
Yep.
I made the call late last year, or early last year. The weeks sort of meld into each other. I thought he'd be making a comeback, but he did make one acute observation about the Greens campaign at the last election. They ran on a slogan of "Keep Dutton out," which it's not just. I don't think it's just hindsight. I mean, that seemed to be lunacy to me because you were basically telling voters in that left bloc, okay, let's keep Dutton out. And so Labor popped up his hand and said, yeah, we're the vehicle to keep him out.
Yeah, I can see how they've come up with that. Their research would have told them that left-wing progressive voters were increasingly becoming agitated towards the Greens in appearing to be in the business of undermining the Labor government and benefiting Dutton as a result of that. So I could see why they've come up with that. But again, that's a really wicked catch-22 problem they got themselves into, right? Where they had to actually project that to the sort of moderate Green voters because they knew they could lose them to Labor, but didn't understand that by doing that, you were going to lose them to Labor anyway, right? To your point.
Yes. No. So when explain that way, it makes sense. But it's still, in terms of the fundamentals, they need to, they have to get back to talking about housing because the housing crisis is still there.
Yeah.
They could be prosecuting a populist economic message.
So they're still very
They're not
popular.
doing that because they're still, I think, today the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, has landed in Australia. They're consumed by that, which is not to say that there's not a large chunk of the left bloc who aren't who may not be, energised by that issue, but they're not voting. They're not going to vote on whether the Israeli president is visiting Bondi.
No, that's right. The Greens' problem is one associated with older progressives and older left-wing voters. They're still doing quite well amongst younger Gen Z voters. I would still say that there is potential for them to grow if they're able to hold on to that vote as that cohort ages. But that's 10 years away, right? And so they're going to have to wait a long time before they see that primary vote of 12% or whatever that is nationally grow in places where it should be growing. And yes, they're going to need to do something radical to capitalise on a growing level of disquiet amongst progressive voters towards Labor. But as I touched on before, the Greens are not seen as that alternative.
Yes, there are dangers for Team Elbow. There is the danger of being politically dominant, which certainly is numerically in the parliament, but dominance without delivery. And when you talk to punters in your groups, this really needs to be a term of delivery. We're already over 6 months into the second term. We're now having debates about, whether Labor should take action on capital gains tax concessions, which I certainly think I think it should go there. If you're not going to go there now, well, when are you ever going to go there? When you speak to people in your groups, particularly within this left block, what does the term delivery actually mean to them?
They know there isn't a silver bullet for a smorgasbord of wicked problems that they're facing, whether it's housing. And we say it's housing, but we're going to remember that a large chunk of that vote actually has mortgages, right? And a large chunk is renting. But a large chunk also is on the pension, right? And these individuals expect and want to see from this Labor government significant reform, knowing fully well it's not going to be a silver bullet. What they don't want to see is Band-Aids. So it's not like, fix it right now. They want to see a plan. They want to see a government that is in the business of changing the country's trajectory and changing their lives' trajectory, knowing fully well that it will take some time to fix this mess. So I think having a mature conversation as a government with your base is the wise thing to do, and I think the Labor camp should be brave in doing that, and not thinking that they need to go and find a silver bullet somewhere.
No, and this is the point about the capital gains tax.
Yeah,
no one's arguing that it's going to be a silver bullet.
No,
but in politics, symbolism matters.
That's right,
and this would be an important message to millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha are on the roll now. Are they on the roll yet?
No. We still got another 5 years of Gen Z to enroll.
Okay, there we
yes.
go. But it would be an important symbolic message in that we see the intergenerational inequity. We're going to do something about it, because at the moment, and certainly if things don't change, we're going to look at a situation where younger Australians, millennials, Gen Z, then Gen Alpha, will be wearing the burden of high personal income taxes, paying for aged care, health needs, other essential services that not just boomers but older Gen X folks need, yet at the same time they're locked out of the property market. Now that's a break. We talk about the social contract. That's ripping up the social contract. So no one's saying that moving on capital gains is going to be a silver bullet, but we're now seeing newspapers like the Australian Financial Review, hardly a doyen of radical left politics. I know you're there regularly in the pages there, AFR. But it's important symbolically. It's also costing a lot of money costs. It's $32 billion a year. It's the biggest tax expenditure item in the Commonwealth budget. The Guardian I saw the Guardian report on this last week.
That's right.
$250 billion over a decade.
That's right. And if you factor in that when we talk about cost of living pressures that people are feeling, particularly on, I wouldn't say it's not just the people on the left side of politics. It's, as we've touched on, conservative working class people who are now voting for One Nation. They have all sorts of pressures on them. Over $3 billion of Australian super funds have gone into paying for surgery. Right? Think about that for a moment.
Just repeat that number.
$3 billion of people's super funds have gone into paying for surgery, out-of-pocket expenses.
Over what period?
I haven't got the exact period, but it's of recent times, right? And so that's because we have a health system that is not fully regulated, and we have surgeons who are charging obscene amount of money, and a lot of working class people, right and left, are finding themselves having to spend thousands of dollars just to get care. As I touched on before, that panel that I sat on last week, there was a woman to my right who had breast cancer. That whole up until now, it's cost her $35,000 of unexpected bills. That's a normal working class person who didn't expect that, thought they were living in a country which would take care of them if they got cancer. Not everyone's got $35,000, right? And so what happens if you're living in the regions and you're in your 50s and you've got debt, you've got a mortgage, but you're barely breaking even? Where do you get $35,000 from?
It's a lot of money. I've got someone very close in my life who had to fork out the same amount of money, and fortunately, in a more comfortable position.
Yeah.
But still, it's a lot of money.
And so what happens when Australians are confronted with this new paradigm, which is you thought you were living in a country that has universal healthcare. It kind of doesn't, right? You thought that you live in a country which has an equitable tax system. It kind of doesn't. And we can go down through the list. And so it should surprise no one that the majority of Australians think the country is heading the wrong direction. And the majority of Australians think that the system is stacked against them.
That's right, Cos. And you know what? People aren't stupid. They've got good bullshit detectors. People would scratch their head and go, why are we paying these huge private health insurance premiums and we're being coerced and compelled to pay them to prop them up?
There's a caveat to that.
And then we have to fork out all this money.
No, so
I actually had to look at my policy.
But there's an absolute caveat to that. When we speak to Australians about private health insurance, it's now become their safety net. So they don't think that the public system is up to taking care of their family's needs. So the growth in private health is not one of I must do it because it minimises my tax. It's I must do it because the public system is not up to it.
Well, that's a depressing thought too, because
this is exactly what's going on here, right? So,
I'm not meant to bash private health.
No,
it's an important part of the sector.
Well, that's what I'm saying to you. That the private health sector has suddenly become a safety net for Australians.
Well, that means we've journeyed down the American road, unfortunately. But let's go. I don't want to go journey into American politics this morning. We're thoroughly depressed as it is. Let's take it back to a provincial level. We've got 2 state elections this year, I think. And when we were talking about these big meta forces of realignment, but most importantly, de-alignment from the majors and the implosion of centre-right mainstream institutional politics, seems to me that both the South Australian and Victorian elections are going to tell us a lot about the state of play on the centre-right. I said last year I thought this Victorian election, which is going to be held at the end of November, is going to tell us a heck of a lot about brand Liberal in this state. But South Australians go to the polls. You mentioned it earlier. Next month, it would seem that Peter Malinauskas and SA Labor headed for a relatively comfortable victory. But so let's assume the victory. Pete would hate me for saying they can bank the victory, but
they can.
I think we can. So the question is, how bad does it look for the Libs? One Nation have said they're going to run a candidate in every single seat.
They've already declared that now, yeah.
Yeah. Whether they actually find, whether
I think they have.
You're able to actually mobilise enough candidates.
Sure.
And then you're going to have problems with vetting and quality, but maybe we've reached the point where people don't care.
Well, they won't care. If you look at the One Nation base, and this is the thing about if the major political parties think, we'll go through their candidates list and find, something that one candidate said outrageous online, these voters won't care. But I must say that I think that's a game that I think all political parties have to put to rest sooner or later, because you are increasingly relying on activists who are very, very prolific online and have probably done all sorts of crazy stuff online. So you're operating in a glass house throwing stones.
Well, that's right. And you'll get to the point where no one can run for parliament because we all have an online footprint.
That's right.
We've all said things in the heat of the moment.
That's right.
Which we would like to take back or perhaps apologise for.
Yeah, correct. So that's
how well will One Nation poll? And what damage will they do to the Libs?
Yeah, look, a question in South Australia is, will the Libs be completely pushed out of Adelaide? Highly likely. Then the question is, how much of the regional vote that the Libs hold on to is decimated by One Nation? We're going to have to wait and see. It's still not the type of state that I would say gives us a full temperature read of One Nation's potential. We get a better read of that in Victoria in this year, in November, because there is just a lot more geography and demography that is probably more akin to voting One Nation present in Victoria than it is in South Australia.
Just on South Australia too, is there also, we've talked about the left-right blocks, but Melly would seem to be something of an outlier where he is taking Liberal voters.
Yes,
and
older
putting them
Liberal boomers,
in,
right?
and he's putting them into the Labor pile.
But boomers are behaving like they've always behaved.
Yeah.
Right?
Is he taking the Gen Xers or not?
No, not really. So boomers are behaving like they've always behaved, right? And then we saw that in Western Australia as well. They are always prone to moving between the two brains, and have been for most of their lives, and so that's not unusual. What you won't see is, for example, people who are in their 20s and have got a history of voting coalition switch over to Labor. They won't do that, and that's a small number. But that's where I'm the point I'm trying to make is that rigid block voting is still present, but when we see events like we will see in South Australia, it's driven by older South Australians.
Yeah. Okay, Victoria.
Yes.
It would seem to me that will tell us a lot more about the impact, but also future direction.
Yes.
Of federal politics. Why, Cosy? What's going to happen in Victoria at the end of this year? I've made a prediction that the Allen government will just hang on, but it's going to be really topsy-turvy and unpredictable.
If you so the coalition needs to win 16 seats. I would argue it's 17 because they're not going to hold on to Paran. So they don't even win 17 seats. If you go through the pendulum and you try to say to yourself, okay, which seats are going to fall? You can probably get to 10 on a really good day, because then you start hitting a bunch of seats that are on massive margins in demographically challenging environments. What we know from our research is the Liberal primaries in all the wrong places. So it's at 40% before One Nation turned up as a political problem, but it's predominantly strong in regional areas and in the eastern part of Melbourne, outer Melbourne. Eastern sort of, we're talking about, your Bayswater, your Basses, your Pakenhams, Scoresby corridor, all that sort of stuff. It's not travelling all that well up and down the Frankenstein line. It's not doing all that well in historically strong areas like Box Hill and so on. And so it's going to be patchy for them. And then we throw One Nation into the mix. And then suddenly Berwick becomes a problem for them, right? They want to win seats like Pakenham and Bass become more of a problem because the One Nation will split the vote there. Flip side, Labor could get into trouble in Melton, although Labor's vote in Melton these days is more diverse than monocultural. The real challenge there for the coalition will be when One Nation stands is in regional Victoria. And this is where we will see, the National Party spend a lot of money defending their seats, although I think that of all the National Party brands across the country, the strongest brand is in Victoria. So I don't think One Nation is going to win all that much downstairs. They may pick up an additional seat or two upstairs. The point I'm trying to make is that the coalition cannot afford to lose even 2 or 3%, but they will when One Nation stands. And they cannot afford that because, as I touched on before, their vote is in the wrong places. Now, that could change. It's a long year ahead of us. Labor's got vulnerabilities. Of course it does, right? And,
the biggest vulnerability, is they're asking for a fourth term.
Yeah,
which is something that Labor's never claimed. But bearing in mind that
people don't care about fourth terms, third terms, second terms. There's a general sense of pessimism.
And you're right. And it's the old, give
someone else a go.
Boomers Gen X will give someone else a go. That's broken.
That's broken. But there is a overwhelming sense of pessimism in the state of Victoria, right? And as it is nationally. So if you're in government, you've got already a challenge before you. You're no longer going to enjoy, particularly in states where the economy is not travelling well. You're not going to enjoy the sort of incumbency advantage that historically that's given you. And of course we've got still the psychological impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns, because it's still there. If you, as a researcher, if you were to ask me to do a happiness measure across the country, the most unhappiest place is Victoria, because it is still recovering from that period. And I think the political class, particularly on the Labor side, don't fully appreciate the damage that was done to people's psychology during that period. We're dealing with a lot of PTSD.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's coming through in that, the surge to One Nation
absolutely
amongst Gen X.
Yes.
You wrote a fascinating Facebook post the other day about how, we're living through this kind of extraordinary experiment where people are being bombarded by images of warfare in real time, horrific images,
yes,
which were once upon a time filtered out by what we call legacy media. There is no filter.
No, that's right. And
that was one of the big takeaways from COVID. It's just
correct. It was,
as everyone was stuck at home,
online,
or in
exposing
front of
themselves to daily doses of trauma.
Yeah,
and every conflict that now comes about, people are sharing online pictures of dead children, pictures of destruction and mayhem. You can watch it in real time, and that's a level of trauma that only combat personnel, journalists who ventured into war-torn areas, and emergency service personnel were and have been exposed to, and we know the consequences of that. And what I watched during the Gaza conflict. A lot of progressives share a lot of really disturbing images, and they're quite passionate about this issue, sure. But what I was also thinking to myself, oh boy, that's going to hurt you personally. You're gonna pay for exposing yourself to that trauma. So we're facing a new paradigm where people are, without knowing, probably suffering from levels of PTSD.
It's a depressing thought.
Yeah, well, they are. And this is why you find that, anyone listening to this, and Nick, you could probably agree to this. Would you say that the world we're now living in just seems a bit more crazy, stressed, anxious, unpredictable, angry? That's all mass PTSD going on. Absolutely.
And I think, we all suffer from that. And one of the things I've noticed myself doing, cause certainly over the last year and increasing I actually was able to, over summer, I rarely go online to Twitter.
Yeah, I've done the same.
Because I don't want to see it.
No, I've done the same. X is turned into exactly what I'm talking about. And for me, I will post on there. I may occasionally reply to something, but I stay off it. And I'm pretty robust mentally on this stuff. And I just found that completely unproductive for my own well-being.
There is, so in this sort of, in this culture that we're talking about, for many on the centre left in the Labor tribe, this is I look back, that they're looking at the implosion of centre-right and right-wing politics, the fragmentation, Greens sort of stuck in a loop. But there are worrying signs there, because if you have an electorate on a couple of levels, an electorate which is so anxious, so pessimistic about the ability of governments to actually make a difference, that's really troubling for Social Democrats, because that's kind of the reason Social Democrats are in politics.
Yeah.
And also, and it will be the message from Jacinta Allen, and it's going to be the message from Elbow leading up to next election is, better the devil you know. You've got to keep the kooks out, whether it's One Nation or some of the extreme right, the Liberal Party. If that's all Labor's in the business of doing, is keeping the other side out, well, that's kind of what the non and anti-Labor side of politics did over the course of the 20th century. So you end up keeping the other side out, but not doing the big structural economic and social reforms.
Yeah, we just spoke about PTSD and the trauma and the pessimism within the Australian society and Western society in general. The only way you break that cycle is you offer people genuine hope. And they know you're not perfect. They know you don't have all the solutions. But if you're in the business, if I was advising the Allen government, if I was, in the business of getting re-elected, hope around basic things that matter to people, health, schools, being able to get to work on time,
Or
those
podcast you on time.
That's correct, right? All those.
It was a struggle this morning, cuz.
Yeah, that's right. All those challenges, and offering your kids a future that doesn't entail them having to be owned by a bank for the rest of their life. These are things that people are looking for to governments, right? And if you're in the business of doing that as a government, then you'll be fine. But if you're not, and you're going to your point, you just want to, basically rely on, vote for us because the right-wing populists are like Trump, then that's only going to last you a certain amount of time.
Indeed. Cozzy, we could talk all day. I've missed you. Listeners have missed you. Been great to see you. We've got plenty to talk about over the course of 2026 with some fabulous guests lined up. Thank you, Curtinistas. We're looking forward to a big year here on Curtin's Cast. Don't forget to refer a mate on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple, and we will see you next week on Curtin's Cast. Ciao, arrivederci.